So this is the first of the New York Film Academy's game deconstruction dinners. Hopefully this is something that we will be doing regularly, at least maybe monthly or bi-monthly, depending on the length of the game that the speaker has to play. So tonight we thought we'd kick it off with Red Dead Redemption 2. How many of you have heard of this game? All right, everybody, that's great, or almost everybody. How many of you have played even a little bit of this game? All right, so some of you. So the goal, we'll talk about what the goal of the Deconstruction series is in a second. Actually, let's just do it right now. So what is a game deconstruction? Most people do a review. A review is like, hey, I played this game, it sucked, or it was awesome, and that's fine, it's opinions, people are allowed their opinions, but we are not just gamers. We are game creators, or at least want to be game creators, or at least people that are interested in the creation of games. And so we need to take closer and deeper looks at things. And part of the reason why we're doing this is Red Dead Redemption is a very long game. This game is huge. The average play time for just the story, to get from beginning to end of the story, clocks in around 55 to 65 hours. How many of you guys have about 65 hours to play one video game? All right, excellent. Oh, a few of you, that's good, you're dedicated. But not all of us do, right? So part of the goal of this series is we play the games so you don't have to. Although, we still want you to play the games because it's always good to play a game, but at least we're putting a step in here to give you the important information that you're going to need to understand what the game is about. So for example, say you're at some sort of swanky party where they're serving pizza outside, and someone says, hey, did you hear about that game, Red Dead Redemption 2? We don't want you to just go, I hear it's good. But, as a game creator, we want you to be able to talk about it and know something about it so you can have a meaningful discourse with other people that have played it, because that's part of, that understanding is an important part of being a game developer, right? And then maybe you might even be inspired to run out and buy it or play your friend's copy or whatever. Now, I do want to warn you that if any of you are sensitive to mature themes or violence or swears, this game is chock full of them. It's an M-rated game, so any of you younger than 18 years old here, we don't have to kick you out? Okay, good. And if you are, all right, well, we'll let you stay. You've been in my class, you've heard swears. So my own play experience. So also this is from my perspective, right? My perspective as a gamer, but my perspective as a game creator. And so because this game is so big and because it is so vast, my experience is going to be very different from your own experience. So I might not even get to things that you have encountered in the course of the game when you play it. And I'm also there's a lot of material online already about this game. There's some fantastic gag reels, by the way. I highly recommend you take a look at them. But what I didn't want to do was cover a lot of the material that all these other reviews cover. So there might be some high-level things that I don't necessarily talk too deeply about because I wanted to focus more on the experience that I had and how my lens of playing the game was impacted by what materials I encountered over the course of the game. So does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, great. All right. So I only played about 80 hours of this game, by the way, and I only got 50% of the story done, actually 50.6, and 41% of the entire game completed. Now, I'm a bit of a completionist. I like to find all the secrets and try to experience as much as I can. So my rate might be a little slower than normal, but that gives you an idea of how big this game is. I played it for 80 hours, and I only got halfway through the game, right? So I still have another 80 hours of gameplay, obviously, ahead of me to play this game, which is, it's a pretty good deal for the money, right? So let's talk a little bit about the vital statistics of this game. Published by Rockstar, the creators of the Grand Theft Auto series and a whole bunch of other great games. And this is the latest in their line of the Red Dead series, originally Red Dead Revolver, which was a very different type of game. But then it was turned into Red Dead Redemption, which came out in 2010. So an 8-year gap between the original Red Dead Redemption and this one. And released just pretty recently, so October. And for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, there's talk about a PC version. I'm sure it will happen. But given the scope of the game, I'm sure it's not going to be coming out for at least a few months, if not half a year or so. The other thing I'm not going to talk too much about is the multiplayer, because I focused on the single player, although there's some multiplayer modes. We'll talk a little bit about it, but I didn't do too much because I was really hyper-focused on the single player experience. However, just to give you an idea of what it takes to make a game of this scale, it took 1,600 game developers, so actual coders, artists, designers, level designers, etc., systems designers, etc. And then they had another 400 people help out with the game. These are voice actors and musicians and people that weren't full-time Rockstar employees. The majority of the team was located in New York, although Rockstar has several different studios all across the world, and I couldn't find substantial proof to say which studios did what, but I'm almost certain, just based on the scope of the game, that I'm sure Rockstar San Diego did certain things, and I'm sure Rockstar in Finland or Norway or wherever they have all these different companies. I think Rockstar has about 5 or 6 different major studios that are working on this game. They all kind of consolidated everything together. Previous to this game, Rockstar was generally, each studio kind of was doing their own, focusing on their own game, and this game was so massive that the fellows running the company just said, we just need all hands on deck for this, and so everybody all worked together on this. So it's a pretty massive game, unusual in its scope, but not unusual for a game of this size. Why is this? So for those of you that take my class, The Great Games, one of the criteria for why a game is great is popularity. It's the easiest one for you to understand. And is this game popular? Boy, howdy, is it ever. It sold 10 million copies in the first 2 days. That is a record, folks. We have hit a new record in the industry. They sold 17 million copies in the first 2 weeks. It has earned $725 million in 3 days. Fastest grossing video game ever, right? It beat out Spider-Man, beat out God of War. The next one in line, if you're going to look at a chart, was Monster Hunter, which made $5 million in the first 3 days. So this game doubled it in less time, right? So that's pretty impressive. And it's also won a bunch of awards so far, Critics' Choice, a lot of voice acting based and music based awards, and fan favorite. But we're not to the big, we haven't hit DICE yet, and I'm sure it will do pretty well at DICE as well when the awards that's coming up in another couple of months. So we're going to look at this through a lens of what is called play-centric systems. Now, how many of you guys are familiar with the Game Design Workshop book? Well, you should, because our illustrious chair, Chris Swain, co-authored this book. And this is a system that he and a couple other smart people developed to look at a game through a series of criteria. The dramatic elements of a game, the formal elements of the game, and the dynamic systems of the game. And we'll be talking a little bit more about what this means in a minute. But this is the lens in which we are going to be doing all these deconstructions, because they help us kind of itemize the different parts of the game and easier to digest bits. And so as we move forward, we'll just remember these are the criteria that we're using, kind of high-level stuff. So let's talk about dramatic elements first. These are things like the premise and the character and the storyline, a dramatic arc, and even something that usually isn't considered as a dramatic element, but it does become very important in this game, which is the concept of time. And we'll talk more about all these in a second. So let's jump right into the premise of the game. The premise is that it is 1899. This is a prequel to the original Red Dead Redemption by about want to say 15 years or so. I think the sequel takes place in 1908 or 10, somewhere around there. And the time of the outlaw is over. The Wild West is done. The Civil War has been fought. And civilization is starting to encroach itself into these previous wild areas. And we, just like in the first Red Dead Redemption, we are with a group of characters that are outlaws, and they're finding themselves that they no longer have a place in this world. The time of running around and taking what you want and killing indiscriminately is at an end, and the law and society are saying, hey, these are not good things. You need to stop this, otherwise we will hunt you down and kill you. Now, what's different between this game and the original Red Dead Redemption is the original game focused on a single character, John Marston. This actually has to do with the gang that Marston was involved with. He mentions it, and we even run into some characters, and we'll talk more about them in a minute. But the developers of this game said, we want to have a whole family of characters. Now, you don't play as any of these other characters. There's probably about 12 or 16 other gang members in the story, and they range from a drunk pastor to a fallen woman to a little like a 6-year-old kid. And so they wanted to build this sense of family and community. And the reason why they did this is a story about loss and change. And in order to feel that loss and change, you have to have something to lose. And so they built this family, because what is more tragic than losing a family, right? And so this is a story about a person who eventually loses his family. Now, the character that we play is Arthur Morgan. We don't get to do much modification, unlike a lot of the other Rockstar games, which, for example, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas had like an amazing character editor, right? You could do all these different things with your guy, I don't know, you couldn't play a woman in that game, right? You just play a guy. So in this game, it kind of follows in that tradition, but not customizable at all. There are ways to customize the character, but you can't like, oh, I'm gonna have blonde hair and be short and fat, or you can get heavy, but you can't get fat like you could at San Andreas. But anyway, Arthur Morgan, this is a very traditional narrative where you're sticking with a singular character, much like a character in a movie. And so Arthur has some traits that he's an outlaw. And by this I mean he goes out and does crimes. A lot of the missions that you do during the course of the game are robberies, stagecoaches and banks, and raids, and all different types of nefarious activities, because this is the world that he's grown up in. In the story, he has been brought into this gang, this family, since he was a young boy, about 15 or so, and it's the only life he's known. He's always been an outlaw, and this has definitely ramifications for the character as we play the game. He's also very loyal to that family. Even though there are characters in the family that are downright despicable, because they are part of this gang, he still supports them and sticks together with them. Although there are certain times in the story where he even tries to dissuade characters from staying with the game. So for example, John Marston, who's the character from Red Dead Redemption, he has a family. John has a family in this game, a wife and a child. And at one point, Arthur says, look, John, this is not a great environment for you to be in. You should really just get the heck out of here. You should leave. And John Marston was like, well, this is my family too. I can't leave. And so Arthur, even though he's loyal to this gang, there are certain characters that he's particularly protective or more friendly towards over the course of the story. And as a player, we start to become fond of these characters as well. There's certain characters that we don't like. For example, there's a character, Bill Williamson, who shows up in Red Dead Redemption as a bad guy, and Bill is a very disagreeable character. There's usually arguments with him, and as a player, he's definitely not one of my favorite characters because he's such a SOB, right? But This is manipulation by the creators. They are making us feel these things, so when certain actions happen, we have certain reactions because our relationship has already started to build towards having negative relationships with these characters. The other thing is Arthur Morgan is a violent guy. He does very violent things, and more often than not, the player is given the option to be violent. But you'll notice here that the player is also given a choice. So, for example, here he is wailing on a rival gang member, and the player is given an option. They can either choke him to death, they can beat them to death, or they can spare their life. Now, at the beginning of the game, generally, at least in my experience, I would just beat the hell out of everybody, right? I'm like, I don't want these guys coming back. I don't know if they're going to show back up in the story, but if I can choke a dude out when I get the chance, I'm going to do it, right? But however, this violence takes a toll. It takes a toll on the character through the story, but it also takes the toll on the player. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm just a little bit more of a softie, but as I started to do all these violent acts over the course of the game, I found that it started to become very repugnant. And I started to spare characters. There were certain characters that I was given the option to kill, or, I mean, I could even just pull out my gun and put a bullet in the guy's head, and that's the end of it. But I started to spare characters because I felt like I was becoming a horrible person by taking this violent option. And we've seen this before in other games. For example, in the Call of Duty Black Ops game, there's a classic example where you're interrogating a character and you're punching him, and then you're given the option to put broken glass in his mouth and keep punching him. And myself, I don't know about you guys, but when I played that, I was like, whoa, that's where I draw the line, man. That's just a little too harsh for me. And the bad thing about it in Black Ops was the character punched the guy in the mouth anyway, even with my hands not on the controller. But in this game, you have a little bit more of an option. Now, the one thing that this game doesn't do, spoilers, is the showing mercy doesn't come back to haunt you, which I think is unfortunately a little bit of an oversight given the depth of interaction that happens in this game. So you can let a guy go and they will never come back to haunt it. Usually this happens within cutscenes, so if you spare somebody and that character, you'll be like, oh, that guy's coming back because there's a cutscene. But if I were to give a situation to spare this guy, it doesn't come back to haunt me as much as I would have liked to. And this is a recurring thing that happens in this game, is that the player is given a lot of choice and a lot of options, and certain things they go pretty far with where it follows through in the course of the way the gameplay works, but in other situations it doesn't go far enough. And we'll talk about a couple of these other instances as well. Now, in response to all this violence, Arthur is also conflicted. And there are plenty of moments during the course of the story where Arthur is showing remorse for this violent lifestyle. There are several female characters in the camp that Arthur can go to and kind of almost like confess. And he'll say, you know, I've done a lot of bad things. I've killed animals and I've killed people and I feel really bad about it and it ain't right. And the women are like, well, you know, maybe you had no choice. Or, yeah, you know, maybe you should kind of rethink your life a little bit, right? And so this is a theme in the game that gets the players to start thinking about the ramifications of that violence, even if it doesn't have immediate gameplay ramifications. And we'll talk about, there's a certain system built into the game that is really supports this idea of behavior and morality, and we'll see how that operates in a minute. The other thing, though, about Arthur is, spoilers, is that he is doomed. There are several encounters that he has with other characters that foreshadow this. Particularly, there are some fortune tellers that will give him a fortune and say, you know, your man is not meant to live very long on this earth. And you start getting this vibe of that Arthur, something bad is going to happen to Arthur. And eventually it does. The ultimate is that it's the Wild West. He goes to collect money from this farmer who is very sickly, and he ends up getting tuberculosis. And so at the end of the game, you have a sick and dying character. And so this is interesting because in a lot of video games, you know, when you get to the end of the story, often there's it's kind of like, all right, success and you won, and that's it, game's kind of over. But this really follows kind of the span of a person's life cycle, even though it's not his entire life. You're not like a little kid and going to him dying. But as your doom starts to approach and you get more information that this is happening to you, once again, it really gets you to rethink the ramifications of your actions. And it's a very interesting and mature way to manipulate the player into feeling conflicted about these situations, right? Because he knows that he doesn't have much time left. What's he going to do with this time that he has? Now, that's the Arthur Morgan that Rockstar wants you to play. And he's a great character, and people are already very fond of him, and even requesting Rockstar to create a mode where Arthur doesn't die and kind of rides off happily into the sunset. But there is another Arthur Morgan, and that's the Arthur Morgan that I experienced, that I played. So my Arthur Morgan, he's a very friendly guy. Any opportunity he can go around and say hello to somebody, he will. I will, hi, mister, how's it going, mister? Wonderful day we have, mister. I'm new to this town, mister. Get used to hearing that often, right? Because he says that to everybody, right? So my Arthur Morgan will never pass an opportunity to say hello to somebody. There's a reason for that as well, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But my Arthur Morgan is also kind to animals. Any opportunity he gets to pet his horse, he will. If he sees a dog on the side of the road, we're given the option to scold it or to praise it. I will always praise that dog and then give him a pet. And once again, this fits in with the character that I felt I needed to play. The game is forcing me in one direction through various mechanisms to play as a bad guy outlaw. But I rebelled against that. I wanted to play a nicer character, a friendlier character, a character that I felt was more of a hero and less of a despicable outlaw. And it was a very interesting thing. As I realized this was happening during the game, I actually became fonder of the character when I realized there were certain things that I could push about. Now this is a moment of what they call ludological dissonance, or narrative dissonance, sorry. And that is that the story is telling me one thing and the game is telling me something else. And the dissonance comes from the game telling me Arthur Morgan is a violent criminal. And the activities I can do are saying Arthur Morgan is not a bad guy. I mean, he does bad things, horrible things, but he also has moments of being a good person. So this pushes him back more into the moral gray area, which is somewhat more compelling to at least me as a player. The other thing my Arthur Morgan is, he's accident prone. And I won't tell you how many times Arthur has run into a tree or a support column on a bridge or something like that. And you'll find there's a lot of hilarious videos online showcasing this. My Arthur Morgan, he's also a snappy man about town. There's some really great customization through costuming and hairstyles. And first I was like, I'm going to be a badass cowboy wearing all black, and I'm going to have a black hat, and I'm going to have a skull on my gun, and I'm going to be a real tough guy. But as I started to realize who my Arthur Morgan was, I'm like, I don't want to be that guy, actually. I don't need to be this stereotypical bad guy. I'm going to try and find my own look. And I went for the gentleman, it looks kind of like Green Arrow, I guess. But kind of the gentleman cowboy, right? I felt that was a much more interesting and fit in a lot more with the personality that I was developing for the character. So, the story in this is a fantastic story, a very involved story, and it hits on a lot of very classic narrative tropes, right? You guys heard man versus nature, man versus himself, man versus man, right? Plug in character instead of man, but we get the man versus his own human nature, man versus the idea of change, man versus society. He's a criminal, so he's at odds with society. And of course, man versus nature. There are all types of wild animals that will murder you the second they get a chance. So this is something that it embraces all of the narrative styles. If you take narrative theory, we'll talk about these types of different narratives that can be told. But it does a very deft job of weaving these narrative points in and out using gameplay as well as the cutscenes and pre-manufactured story. And this creates a very fascinating narrative, which, as you guys know, the narrative is the game of the player, right? Not the story that is being told by the game designer. That's the story. And so these elements are not just present in the story that has been created by Rockstar, but very present in the narrative that I come away with. This is the thing that I am telling you about today. The real interesting one, though, and this is a theme that was also in Red Dead Redemption, is this idea of change, that times are changing. And it's even more obvious in this game than it was in Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption was like, look, you're a criminal, you can't be a criminal, maybe you should become a good guy, I should reform, but I have a little bit of unfinished business. This, the idea of change is really in your face, even to the point where you have the suffragette movement, which is women's rights, kind of the origins of this, and historically in America, this is when this happened in the 1890s. And so it ties into a lot of these themes. You'll encounter a lot of characters that are saying, you know, we are women and we want our rights and we want to be free, or we were ex-slaves from the Civil War, but we're still being oppressed. We need our freedom. And so it's not preachy, but it is interesting to see these themes coming up. These are not themes you see very often in video games. And so because of this historical context, it gives us a really interesting way to look at them and even learn a little bit about what those times might have been like. The change is also reflective in some of the characters in the story. For example, Sadie is a character that you rescue at the beginning of the story. Her family has been murdered, and you cart her along with you. And for about the first third of the game, this is pretty much what she does. She just mopes along and is kind of sad and pathetic. But there's a certain point where Sadie gets an opportunity to kind of come out of her shell and prove herself. And by the end of the story, she's kind of a badass. She's a character that I wouldn't mind playing an entire game as. And so this is an interesting thing. The other fascinating thing about this game is that John Marston, the character from the first game, is essentially a bystander in this game. And it's very weird. It's kind of like if you were to play a Tomb Raider game and you spent the entire game being someone other than Lara Croft, but Lara Croft is hanging out with you the whole time. Right? And so it's this interesting, once again, this interesting lens to see this is what you know. You're John Marston. It's kind of this touch point from this game that hopefully you've already played. But now you're going to see how his relationship, and we'll get to a little bit more about him in a minute, how it is in regards to you, who is this new kind of outsider character, but is very tightly woven into his story. So it's almost like you're getting two stories in one. You're getting Arthur Morgan's story, which is the one you were playing, but you're also getting another perspective on John Marston, who was the protagonist of the previous game. The other thing is the idea of the human nature, right? We talked a little bit about this already. Arthur does bad things, but he can also go into town and donate for the old veterans home. Or he might be able to help the monk who has found out there are slaves in the basement of the gunsmith shop, and so you go and free them. And then he says, hey, I want to give you the money to as thank you, and now I'm given the choice to say I'll take it or not. And a little bit to my own surprise, I said, you know what, you keep it. You keep it for the poor, right? Once again, my character is evolved. I feel like my character is evolving, and it's not just a set of stats, it's a personality. And I've not played too many games where I've had this sensation before, where I feel like the character that I'm playing is becoming this different person than what we started out with, right? I mean, often our arcs in games are stat-based, or they are a story derived by the game designer, but in this case, I feel like I'm much more crafting the personality and this character that I am portraying, right? It's a lot more role-playing, but without the obvious, I'm going to click up my charisma or my spell slots or whatever. So it's this very fascinating way of getting the player more engaged in the storyline and the characters. So there's a lot of connections in this game. Like I said, it's 12 years before the original game. There's a lot of returning characters. John, of course, the lead character from the previous game. Dutch, who was the arch villain in the previous game, and we already know what his fate is. And once again, it's this very interesting thing because we know that certain characters live and certain characters die. And so this interesting thing, how many of you guys saw the Han Solo movie? Right? Now, how many of you were like, well, I already know what's going to happen to Lando and Chewbacca and Han Solo, right? So you weren't as invested in them, right? Like, you kind of felt like they're safe. So the ones you were worried about were L7, the droid, and Kira, the girlfriend, and any of the other ancillary characters, right? So this kind of does the same thing. We have about 5 or 6 characters that we already know their fates, but then we have this whole other cast of another 6 or 7 characters that we don't. So this is where it gets very interesting, right? And ironically, the characters that we grow the most attachment to during the course of the story are not these guys. Because most of these guys are bad in the other game, right? There are enemies, we fought them, we kill them in the game, except for John, of course, who we are. But the other characters that are new to Red Dead 2 are the ones that we end up forming relationships with or even getting fond of, which I thought was a very clever choice, because then it kind of removed that. The mystery's already gone for these guys, right? Particularly if we've played the first game. So now it's like, all right, let's become more invested in the new characters, and those are the ones that maybe bad things might happen to, right? So then that's a great opportunity for some drama. The one thing that I really felt was kind of missing from the game was an opportunity to make deeper connections with some of the characters. So I played this game. Early on in the game, Arthur doesn't have he has kind of an ex-girlfriend who is a little bit of a jerk. But there are other women in the camp that are friendly and pretty, if you can get past the uncanny valley aspect of it. And to be honest, about, I don't know, maybe 20 hours into the game, I was like, I kind of wish I could start a relationship with one of these girls. Maybe it's the old Harvest Moon player in me talking, but I wanted to bake Karen a pie and give it to her and say, hey, will you be my girlfriend, or something. You pick a lot of flowers and herbs in the game, and I was like, well, what if you pick some flowers and give them to the girl and try to woo her a little bit and see what happens, right? It's a mature rated game. We can have a little bit of kissing or something, right? But unfortunately, the game doesn't go that far because the narrative is very fixed. And this is an interesting thing, though, that when I did some research, the developers were planning on having a second romance character. The one that you kind of end up with is Sadie, but they were actually planning a second character that you could choose, but they realized that even that single divergent path was such a huge amount of work that they were like, well, what, let's just cancel the other woman and we'll just leave it with the one. So this is an interesting thing to think about, particularly when you're making some sort of interactive narrative. And I've experienced this before as a game developer, where the producers will say, look, is it worth it to put all this time and effort into something that the player will never even see? Right? Even if I were playing the game and Kevin was like, hey, I went out with Mary, and I'm like, oh, I went out with Sadie, and we compared notes on how we romanced them, the producers felt that, it's too much money, it's too much time, this game is too big as it is, let's cut this back. So this is something to keep in mind, particularly when you're proposing branching narratives in your games, is this idea that what is the cost? What is it going to mean in terms of resources and the product that you're making? The other thing that's interesting is the way, like I said, the way that the relationships change over the course of the game. This character, Kiernan, is originally captured as a prisoner, and he's treated really poorly by not only the gang, but by Arthur, who threatens to kill him very often and will tie him up next to the stew pot and say, I'm not going to feed you. And he's pretty much tortured by the gang. But eventually, over the course of the story, Kiernan saves Arthur's life, and you warm up to him, and eventually get to the point where actually he's a very likable character. You go on a few missions with him. It's very he's a character that you end up really liking, which makes it even worse when he is beheaded and sent back into your camp by revenge of the gang that he used to be a member of. And so once again, it becomes this emotional gut punch to the player where you're like, oh no, not Kieran, and I like that guy, you know? And it's not quite the level of Eris from Final Fantasy where you're like, oh no, there goes my best healer. But it's still pretty emotional for the player. The other thing about the story to keep in mind is this is a game for adults. It's a mature rated game, and so you get to take a little bath with benefits, but you can also have little conversations with them. And the bath is actually interesting because it serves a couple of purposes. Cleanliness actually matters in this game. Now, it doesn't get all crazy obsessive like San Andreas does, where you have to wash and do lift weights to get back in shape and things like that. But part of it is due to the hunting mechanic. If you are cleaner, you will smell less. And it will look later at the hunting mechanic, but being less smelly makes you less detectable by animals. So it's easier to actually track and hunt things if you're clean. So that's an interesting byproduct. Also, there are people on the street that sometimes will react to you if you are filthy. Often in the process of hunting or even killing people, you'll get blood on your costume, and people will react if you are covered in blood and not positively. They'll mention it and go, oh, that's disgusting, or oh, they'll kind of shy away from you and that. So there's some very interesting and subtle relationship things that happen in the course of the game due purely to visual, what you would dismiss as a visual thing, but it matters. And this is a really good design point, which is if something happens in your game, it should have some sort of ramification for gameplay. And so me going and taking a bath, even though it's kind of funny, haha, he's taking a bath and God knows what he's getting as an extra benefit, but ultimately it serves a gameplay function. The other thing that is mature about this, though, is like I said, is the story. It's not just I'm riding around, I'm a cowboy, I'm robbing things, isn't it great to be a cowboy? But it is a very deep look at change and how times changing can catch up to somebody and what happens if they're not prepared. And all the characters in the game represent some sort of element of a personality type reacting to that change. Arthur is conflicted. He knows that things are changing, but he doesn't know if he can change himself. Dutch, the leader of the gang, is just furious that this change is happening. Jack, who is the little kid, he's happy. He loves it when things change because it's interesting and new to him. But he's also a kid, right? What does he know? And so it's this very interesting look at kind of all the different personality types and how they react to this situation. And it gets you to think a little bit about yourself. What would I do if I was in this situation? Or maybe I can even turn the lens back out into the world we're in now, because obviously we're in a society where a lot of change is happening, and we have to figure out what is my place in that world. And so it's a great game if you want to be introspective after you're done playing. The last dramatic element that is highlighted in the game is time. Now, time is not just a mechanic where the sun goes up and down and it becomes nighttime and certain things are open and closed depending on the hours, but there's a lot of gameplay elements that are activated only during certain hours. So you have to plan your day accordingly if you want to go through certain missions. There's one, for example, that only takes place between midnight and 1 in the morning. And I won't tell you how many times I blew my opportunity to be in the right place at the right time because I was off by about 10 minutes. So it pays to be punctual in this game. Fortunately, the game gives you several tools, including a pocket watch, which you can physically pull out, or it also lives on your HUD, and that helps you over the course of the game. Did you have a question?
Does it use in-game time or like real life time?
No, it uses in-game time about every 20 minutes or so is like an hour, or 10 minutes is an hour. Time advances very fast in the game, although even if you're waiting 7 or 8 hours for something to happen, it still can feel kind of long. And there are several systems built into the game to advance time. One of the most important one is you can either camp or go back to your base camp and sleep, and or rent a hotel room and sleep. And you're given the option to sleep till morning, till noon, or to midnight. or sometimes 6 in the evening. It depends on when you go to bed. Usually it's a sequence of 3 time units. So if I go to bed in the morning, I'm given afternoon, evening, and midnight as my options. If I go to bed at night, I'm given morning, afternoon, and evening to deal with. So essentially there's 4 time zones in the game. And once again, not just because it creates these beautiful sunsets and sunrises and things like that, but it really gives you this passage of time, and coupled with the really interesting visuals and vistas that you get, you really do feel like there's an evolution happening, not just within the character, but within the world itself. It feels like a living, breathing world, and everything in the game, it has kind of its own agenda. You might go to a cabin in the middle of the woods in the afternoon and nobody's there, but if you come back at night, that person had been out hunting all day and now they're home and they're hanging out or stuff like that. So there's a lot of things. Almost everything in the game has its own time system other than key plot points. There are certain plot points that you can extend. So for example, I was playing a mission where a character had been kidnapped, but I ended up spending about 3 days just going off hunting and things like that. And so when I got back, everyone's like, all right, let's go rescue that kid. Which of course, you wouldn't want to wait 3 days if your kid was kidnapped, right? It kind of shows a little bit of its gaminess in that system, but it allows me to play the game more the way I want, so I don't feel like I'm on such a rigid timeline. And once you make that realization, the game really kind of loosens up. It actually feels much more flexible than you thought it did, because now you have a little bit of control over when those events happen. You can trigger them because you get, even if you don't have complete information of what that event is going to be, you know that it has some sort of narrative relevance. And it's always marked on, well, there's no image here, but it's always marked on the little map with like a yellow color-coded icon. So that lets you know, oh, this is going to be something that will help advance the story in some way. One other thing that happened to me that was really interesting that had to do with time was I was out hunting and causing trouble and robbing people and stuff like that. And I came back to our camp to realize there was a dog there. And I'm like, where'd this dog come from? And I'm like, all right, well, I guess we have a dog now, right? So I went and I pet the dog and all that and, whatever. But I went back and did some research, and I realized there's actually a story point where the boy finds the dog and names the dog and gives the dog, now you start to get a little personality. And I had missed that opportunity because I was out gallivanting and doing my own stuff and taken so long that I didn't come, like by the time I got back, all this had happened. And so it really created this great notion of that passage of time. And even though it really didn't matter too much to the gameplay or to my personal narrative, I actually felt a little sad that I had missed this moment, because I'm like, oh, I didn't get to see the kid find and name the dog. All right, well, whatever. All right, so let's talk about the formal elements for the player. Here we are in my formal wear. We'll talk about first the formal elements for the player. So the formal elements, of course, are the things that the player is going to do to interact with the game and move things along, particularly things that the players have to master. And there's a lot for the player to do in this game. Many games focus on 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 different, what I call primary actions, things that are important. So for example, many of you students have heard, what is the primary action of Pac-Man? What does he do? Yeah, he moves, right? He moves around, and as he moves, he eats, or he moves away from the ghost. What does Solid Snake do in the Metal Gear games? Snoots, but what else does he do? Sneaks, yeah, and those are kind of his 2 major things. He sneaks and he shoots, right? But this game, you walk and you ride and you drive and you fight and you shoot and you rope and you track and you hunt and you fish and you cook and you craft and you do chores and you customize. Oh, I forgot to put sneak in here. And you gamble and you game and you search and you loot. Oh, there's sneak, and then interacting, and sometimes you just spectate. Sometimes you just watch things. You go to the theater and watch somebody do a performance, or watch somebody play the guitar and play a song, right? Which is, how often do you want to just stop and listen or look at something in a game? Usually we're like, I got to get here, I got to get there, I got to get the sword, I got to get the gems, right? But this game actually gets you to slow down and start to enjoy the world and enjoy the experiences. And like I say, you kind of feel bad when you miss some of these things. And this is a hard trick to do. This is a very hard thing to do in a game because we are so hyper primed to be running around and I got to search everything and I got to take everything and I got to maximize my character and get the best guns and the best this and that. This game goes, wait a second. I'm glad you did all that stuff. Now let's take a break and let's watch the sunrise, or let's listen to Juan play on his guitar or whatever, right? So there's these really great moments of stop, start, and it creates this very interesting sense of pacing throughout the whole game. And so this is a very interesting thing, even though there are all these things to do that are great and fun. Maybe the most important is when you stop and not do anything at all. So there's also a lot of things to do, though. You know, stopping and watching the sunrise is great, but I got people to rob and horses to race and fetch quests to go on and treasure hunts. The treasure hunts are one of my favorite things in the game. These are opportunities to find maps, and then you're kind of led all over the world trying to find the location of the next map, which eventually will lead to some sort of treasure. Now the thing is this, the goal of the treasure hunts is not to find the treasure. What do you guys think the goal of the treasure hunt is?
Explore the world.
Explore the world. Get familiar with the world. Start to look at the world in detail. Realize, hey, there's a weird rock that looks like a face. Here's a tree that has a hole in it. I wonder if there's something hidden in there. Hey, there's a waterfall. I wonder if there's a cave behind it. Right? So once again, this game is getting you to do things that you think are traditional video game activities, but in reality, it's getting you familiar with the world, which is a really clever way of doing this because you don't realize it until you start recognizing stuff and go, oh yeah, I've been here before. I know where this thing is. Or I look on this map and I recognize that double peak of rocks that the treasure map is near. I know exactly where that is. I'm going to go there. And because remember, this is a fictitious universe. This is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different Western tropes. It's not like LA Noire, which was almost a one-to-one map of LA in the 40s, which ironically, when I played LA Noire, I was able to navigate that map without even referring to the map because I know downtown LA, right? But I can't do that in this game. I have to explore it first and discover the world. But now I'm getting to the point where I'm familiar. I'm like, oh, I know where this is. I know where that is. All right, I'm getting there, right? Only 80 hours later do I feel like I'm starting to learn my way around. This game also does what the first game does magnificently as well, which is to appeal to the 4 quadrants of the Bartles test. You guys know the Bartles test, right? The 4 different types of gamers that you can be. Everybody is really a mix of all these things, but we tend to gravitate towards one more than another. So this game, there's a lot of killing in this game, but it's not just killing, it's succeeding over obstacles, right? There is a lot of achievements in this game, way more. I think I have like 19% of all the objectives and things that you can earn in the game. Exploring, this is what this game does best. It is, if you want to just immerse yourself into a world, this is the game to do it. The thing that it doesn't do a lot of yet is the socializing. Now, Red Dead Redemption had some really great multiplayer. You could get gang together and go rob a train or get into gunfights or ambush other players, things like that. All those are being developed right now. There's a beta going on. They just released a battle royale mode called Gun Rush, which is essentially their answer to Fortnite. I haven't played it yet, partially because I'm just so engrossed in the main game, partially because I hate playing with other human beings because they're all jerks. But that said, I will give it a try because I'm curious to see what they do with it. And I know that in the original Red Dead Redemption, they changed some of the rules of the player character. For example, the auto aim is turned off in order to give everybody even footing in the game. So I'll be exploring that eventually. Just I don't have a lot of data on it tonight, so I apologize. Some other formal element is the notion of procedures. Now, there are certain things that require certain things to be done, but it's not just a level of execution, it's a level of mastery. So for example, Arthur can craft or have a character craft different things for them, one of which is this, there's all these different types of satchels, but you need to have certain ingredients in order to build these, and many of them have to be perfect. So that means if you see that it is perfect, what's that obligation on the player? They have to be perfect at killing that animal, skinning it, and bringing that skin back so now you can craft it. So at the beginning of the game, I'm just killing everything willy-nilly, animals, you name it, however I can get it done. But when I made this realization that I had to up my game, rather than the game saying, you got to get good, it said you got to get good, but it did it in a very quiet way. It said, well, if you want to have these nice things, you got to get a little better, and you got to create these perfect things. And the only way to create these perfect things is to have the right gear, or to get better at how you are actually hunting these animals. So once again, it wasn't overt. It was very subtle in the way that it was pushing me towards certain behaviors without being super overt about it. The same is true for the treasure, although the treasure I encountered a bit of a flaw, which I think it irked me a little bit, and that was there's a cave behind this treasure hole. I had a huge bounty on my head. I had like $350 in one county, I had $250 in another county, and remember, this is back in the day when you could buy a sandwich for like a nickel, right, or less. I mean, money, even though you get small amounts of it, and it's a very realistic simulation of how much money was worth back in the 1800s. And so when I had these hundreds of dollars of bounty on my head, I'm like, oh crap, I got to get money and I got to get it fast. Well, I went to sell some stolen horses. I only got 30 bucks for them. I sold some stolen carts. I got 60 bucks for them. I'm not going to hit $350 very quickly this way. So I said, all right, what's my option? I got to go find treasure. And so I went on, it was the one time I broke out of the game and went online to look up something which I feel a little disappointed of. I wish the game had a better way of communicating what some of the value of this end result would be. But I knew that there was treasure hunts and there was treasure at the end of it, and the gold bars that you get were worth $100 a piece, and you would get multiples of them at a time. So I'm like, great, I can work off all my debt if I just find a couple of these treasures. So I said, all right, which is the biggest treasure? They said, oh, there's this big treasure behind this waterfall. So I had found this map, and I went to the waterfall, and I went creeping past the waterfall and into the cave. But when I got to the cave, there was no treasure. And I'm like, wait a second, why isn't there a treasure? The game said, the cheat online said there'd be treasure. And I went back and did a little more research, and I had to find 2 other maps before technically finding this third map. And so the procedure was saying, well, that treasure isn't there yet until you find those 2 other maps. And it kind of took me out of the world, because I was already probably about 40 hours in by this point. And I'm like, oh man, this is the first time I've kind of seen the structure of the game at work, because it had done such a great job up to this point of blending it with the gameplay and the narrative. And so I went back and I found the maps, and I eventually got the treasure and paid off my bounty. But it was that one moment where I'm like, oh darn, it's thwarting this thing, and I almost kind of wish that it would have just let me go back there, find the treasure, and be done with it. But of course, the game designer didn't want me to do that. They wanted me to go through these steps. And so this is something to be aware of: is do your procedures show the structure of your game, or is it blended more seamlessly within the game experience itself? Another thing that the game does beautifully, formally, is customization. It's done through clothing. This is just kind of the basic ensemble choices you get at the beginning of the game. It gets much fancier and much more ridiculous. And supposedly there's even a cheat where you can run around naked in the game, and you'll get arrested for streaking. The other thing that is actually, I wish would happen in the real world, was how easy it was to shave in this game. You can go from full bushy mountain man to very handsome, clean-shaved gentleman. And this is just in the camp. You can actually get a nicer shave and more formal styles if you visit a barber in the town. And I didn't think I would care so much about my facial hair in a video game, but I actually do. And it's actually, going to the barber is actually one of the more enjoyable experiences in the game for me. And so this is interesting. It's a little, almost a little nothing. It doesn't mean anything to the game, but to me, it just was one more thing where I'm like, oh, I want to look nice. I'm going into town. Let me clean up and put on a nice suit, and off I go. You can even customize your horse, braid its tail. You can dye it pink. I mean, this is like 2 out of about 50 different options that you have for your horse. So the horse is an extension of your character. You can pick you'll find all different colors, all different breeds. My horse is named Silver 2 because I won't tell you what happened to Silver 1. And yeah, you bond very tightly with the horse, which creates another gut punch moment at the end of the game. During the last sequence, your horse gets killed. And once again, it's that moment where you're like, no, my horse! And particularly if you've been keeping the same horse throughout the whole story, it's very easy. You can change horses like you can change underpants in this game. But I like bonding, and you get bonuses for bonding with your horse. It performs better. It levels up. And I have a real fondness for Silver 2, and I will do anything I can to make sure that it doesn't die. I will treat it nicely. I will give it medicine. I will even restart games if something happens to my horse. A couple of other interesting systems are kind of the heart of the character, literally. Health, stamina, and Deadeye. These pertain to, of course, your hit points. But what I like about it, it's not numeric, although it lives in the bottom corner of the screen, which sometimes in the heat of action makes it a little hard to keep track of. And I'm not sure how I would have solved that if there was a better place for it to live, but I wish that it wasn't so easy to not notice at times. Stamina is also very interesting if you're doing a lot of activity. I just recently drowned because I was swimming around and my stamina wore out, and I sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And then Deadeye is an ability that you use during gunfights to slow down time to get the drop. This is the same mechanic from the first game. Your inventory system is pretty deep as well. There's a satchel, yes?
Can you explain Deadeye a little bit more?
Yeah, we'll talk about Deadeye in a minute and see an example of it. The satchel, you have several different mechanisms to carry things. The satchel is essentially a bag that you carry with you. You also have bags on your horse that can be upgraded. The satchel can also be upgraded. And there are several different things that you can store in it, food and medicines and kind of treasures that you will be bringing back to other characters for fetch quests. And a wide selection of maps and journals that the player gets story information and quests from. The other major interface is the items wheel. And the item wheel, the initial one is weapons, so you have a variety of weapons. But if you, essentially the way you get it is you left trigger on L1, and then you will move the stick, the right stick, around the circumference of the wheel. And then if you want to select within that, you can left-right. This is my only real beef with the interface system. It works pretty well, but a lot of items are hidden, nested within the wheel, even from the start of the game. So for example, when I was going to explore that cave, I was kind of fumbling around in the dark trying to go, how do I get light? And I actually had a lantern that was with me the whole time, but I just didn't know it. There was nothing in the game at that point that had said, hey, you have this lantern, pull it out. But there are several objects that are like that. The rope is a constant object. There's a knife that replaces the lantern. And then if you ever want to drop an item or disarm yourself, essentially, you just go to the bare hand, which will allow you to punch people and things like that. It's not, in the heat of a battle, it's a little bit of an inelegant system because you are doing a lot of what I call handiness, right? You are pressing R1, you are rotating with your thumb, you are hitting L1 and R1, and it suffers a little bit from that old designer problem of, hey, I've got all these keys and buttons, why don't I use them all? And that's one of my bigger complaints. It causes some confusion. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other interesting element is the honor system. We'll talk more about how that works. But an interesting byproduct of the honor system, whether you're honorable or a bad guy, even though it gears certain things like people's behaviors towards you, the real reason that it kind of exists, at least in the good spectrum, is that you get discounts in the stores if you're a nice person. So this game is driving you towards being a nice person by the certain systems, even though the story is telling you you're a bad person. So once again, a little bit of that narrative dissonance, the gameplay not quite meshing up with the story that's being told. Or is it, right? All right, of course, it wouldn't be a Western game without some conflict. There's lots of different activities that you can do to cause violence against people. But the real interesting thing about the game is as you experience the world and move through it, you find that the world of Red Dead Redemption, there's a lot of unpleasant people in it. There are people that are willing to try and kick your ass at a moment's notice. If you look at somebody the wrong way, they'll try and kill you or shoot at you. I've had situations, there was a guy panning for gold. I just walked up to him to kind of see what was going on and see if I was going to learn how to pan gold from him. And he turned around and pulled a rifle at me and started shooting at me. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm just trying to watch you pan for gold, okay? But so the world is generally unpleasant. You can do certain things to counter that by gaining some honor and being a nicer person. So some people will treat you with a little more respect. But as a general rule, and particularly during the beginning of the game, you are despised by a lot of people in the game. And it was starting to turn me into a bit of a misanthrope. I was starting to not like the people in the world. And so I would kill them indiscriminately because I'm like, well, F you, you know, you're going to treat me poorly, I'm going to get back at you, right? But once again, I got tired of that. I got tired of being this bad character. And so I was like, all right, what systems can I develop to become a better person and change my relationship with these people in the world? The other thing that's interesting during the fighting is the unpredictability. Well, just when you think that things are predictable, in a conflict, things can change. So let's look at a little bit of a clip.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. You see a drunken idiot, priest, wandering about?
I didn't even wait for his answer. I didn't care.
Have you lost your mind? Get your hands off him.
You're king. You stay out of it.
Get your hands off him now, you son of a bitch.
What the hell is your problem?
So I was going to shoot this guy, right? And it'd be easy to just shoot him, but I don't know if that's very sporting. This guy looks like he wants to fist fight. So why not? Let's fist fight him. Although I'm not doing very well.
Come on.
So I'm like, screw that, I'm in a hurry. I think I'm just going to shoot this guy instead, right? Look what that guy did. He knocked the gun right out of my hand. Stay down, will you?
Who's talking now? Huh?
Oh my God, kill him. I'm gonna keep the law on you.
Now this is the other problem. If you're overly violent, any little think will run off to tell the law on you, right? So here I am like an idiot trying to pick my gun back up so I can go get this guy, and guess what's not happening? I'm having control issues, right? Where's my gun? I gotta get that gun. No, get the gun. Pick up the gun. Come on, get the gun. The guy's getting away. Oh man, I blew it. So sometimes the control system is very interesting. Takes unexpected turns, but also it's a bit of a bear to control, particularly in the heat of action, right? So I was trying to get my gun, what should be a very simple action, but just because of the way the control system worked, it was just making it harder for me to pull off that move. And this is something that if anybody in the reviews you read, some people will say, hey, the control systems have its problems. Another thing that is interesting about the game is it does have a little bit of a difficulty ramping system, but it's not very overt to the player. There are some areas that are kind of locked off, mainly towns that you're not supposed to go in because you're wanted, and the minute you enter them, you'll get murdered by a whole bunch of bounty hunters. But there's also, some ramping within the missions, but it's not really clear that some of these missions are harder than others. So this is a mission where I was going after a debtor that owed us money, and he said, all right, I don't have any money, but if we hunt this white cougar, you can take the fur and sell it. So I join him in the cave, and and the best way to hunt anything in the game is with a bow and arrow because it doesn't damage the hide. However, I didn't know that if you fight these kind of special enemies, that no matter what you use on them, the hide won't get damaged. So here I am, some idiot, going into a cougar's den with a bow and arrow. Let's see what happens.
This is it. Her den. We should leave the horses.
All right, should I get a rifle? Nah, I get a bow.
All right. Show me.
You'll see her soon. Quiet now. Won't be able to miss her shining in the dark. You hear that? There's a cougar in here. And I bet she's white as virgin cotton. The tunnel diverges up here. I'll take the left, you go right, and we'll see if we don't converge down a ways. And look out for her.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to get with me was some predator bait. I figured, well, if I have some bait, maybe I can lure the cougar into where I want it to be, right? Set up a trap.
Holmes? Waiting, Holmes? Mess around with me, boy. She got it. Crap. Damn dead.
By the way, if you ever find a body in this game, loot it. Wait a second, I don't want to ruin its hide. Oh crap, there it is. Get it. Oh, shoot. Oh. Get it. Oh, bad shot. All right, I'll just wait for it. It's going to come down one of these two tunnels, I know it. I'll be ready. Oh wait, there was a third tunnel. So this is a more difficult encounter, so let's try that again. This time I'm going to put down some bait and try and create a trap for it, okay? If I stand on this rock, I can get a good shot at it, right? Oh shoot, I fell off the rock! All right, get back on the rock, I'll be okay. Wait, where's that rock? Get back on the rock.
Where are you?
Ah! All right, let's try that one more time. I know I can get it this time. All I have to do is lay down the trap, get on the rock, get my bow and arrow ready. Everything should be fine, right? The other nice thing is sometimes the game skips through, kind of accelerates time a little bit. So you skip through things if you do it repeatedly, and it makes it for a shorter experience. It's a very nice touch to keep you from feeling like I'm going through the same long experience over and over again. All right, that guy's dead. Yeah, we know he's dead. Oh yeah. All right, I'm not even gonna loot him this time. Get my bow. I get my bait. Gonna lay a little trap. All right, let's lay a trap. This should be far enough. All right, get on that rock, quick, don't fall off. Get on the rock. All right, there it is. Get the bow, yep, get on the rock. All right, up there it is, get it. Oh, bad shot, try again. Oh, wait, throw it off. Shoot it. All right, wait, oh, it's gonna come for me. Yeah. All right, we got it. Excellent, congratulations. Yeah, it took a while, but all right, so then you skin the cougar and you bring it back. And when you skin something, a hunt or something, you can put the fur onto your horse. Your horse has different types of storage. So I'm gonna go back to old Silver 2 and put my fur onto my horse. Now the other thing is, when you come across like stray horses, you can cash them in, sell them for a little extra money. So like, well, maybe I'll sell Winton's horse for a little extra money. Oh wait, he's got saddlebags. There's always something good in guys' saddlebags. Let me get something out of the saddlebag here. All right. Well, after all that. All right, so let's talk about dynamic systems. So the dynamic systems are the interactions and the feedback that happens to the player when you do something, something else happens. So there's the basic dynamic system of interacting with characters. You can, for the most people that you meet in the world, you can either greet them, hey, how's it going? Antagonize them, you're looking really ugly today. Rob them, give me all your money, or just even aim your weapon. If you aim your weapon at them, often they'll react in fear or they'll get mad at you and try and start a fight. So this is kind of the basic world interactions that you have with all the characters. But there are some other very interesting and important types of interactions. One is the horse bonding. By feeding your animal, by encouraging your animal, by petting it, by brushing it, you become friendly with any horse in the game, even to the point where, once you bond with it, it will start to nuzzle up against you and give you love. And so you get very fond of your horse and want to make sure that it's safe. The other is the honor system we talked about. It's represented by this bar here on the bottom. Several things will create honor for you. For example, saying hello to enough people, you'll get a little push-up on your honor system. If you do something that is considered good in the game, you'll get a little honor. Or if you do something bad, you'll get a little bad honor. If you loot people, you'll get bad honor. One of the more interesting ones is during a gunfight. If you shoot somebody and kill them in kind of a low down way, you'll get bad honor and a little bit of a, kind of like, at the end of Batman Arkham games when you beat up the last guy, it's like in slow-mo. You get something like that. But if you do kind of a rad, honorable kill, not only will it show the guy getting killed, but it'll also show you shooting them looking like a badass, right? So it's this very interesting way of taking the same system and just by adding one little dimension more to it, making it serve both masters, right? Both the good and the bad honor. Also, you'll get bad honor if you have bounties, but the problem with bounties is the minute you enter the territory, depending on the amount of bounty against you, will draw the police, much like the star system in the Grand Theft Auto games. And I've had like up to about a dozen cops chasing after me because my bounty was so high, it was not good. But this wanted system, just like Grand Theft Auto, can be thwarted by getting outside of a sphere of influence and hiding out, sometimes hiding in bushes. One time I hid under a bridge in the water, and all the cops were running over trying to find me, and eventually they gave up, and then an alligator came and ate me. But it's a pretty complex system. This is a really interesting tree showing, you commit a crime, and if somebody witnesses it, their eye pops up, and then if they don't know who the criminal is, you get a red one because you're wearing a mask, or they witness and identify you, and they just run to report the crime like that little jerk did in the video. But if there's no witness, the crime is unknown and doesn't get punished. And it kind of goes down from there, resulting in bounties and how the cops react to you and how the citizens in the town react to you. It's a very complex system, much more evolved than the ones in the Grand Theft Auto series, close to what's in Red Dead Redemption 1, but a little bit more elegant with this extra layer of being cognizant of what you're doing. You have to be aware of your situation. One time I was committing a crime. I killed somebody. I thought I was completely clear. And then I looked up and there was a guy on like the second floor of a building. I'm like, that guy sees me. I got to go run and kill him before he tells somebody. So, you can, if you're wanted though, you can still walk up to the cops and be like, hey, how's it going, right? But if you do anything shady in their presence, even if you bump into somebody, it's considered disturbing the peace. And it's the one thing that can get a little annoying is sometimes the things that trigger the police coming after you when you have a bounty on you seems very slight compared to, killing. I mean, I'm murdering people left and right, but if I bump into some dude, that's going to get a bunch of cops coming after me. And once again, that takes me a little bit out of the game because it feels like an unrealistic punishment for the type of crime that I've committed. Some other interesting systems are the way that things chain together naturally in the game. And it's a very subtle way that they train the player to do things. This is an event that happens relatively early in the game. You're out riding with Hosea, who's one of your kind of father figures in the game. And this is going to teach the player how to hunt, how to ride, how to hunt, and how to cook.
Idiot! Get a hold of that horse, will you? Look there. Rabbits. Maybe we should catch one to cook.
Sure. Try and shoot one.
Good job. All right. It's getting late. Reckon we should camp here.
Sure.
Now then, you get us set up.
I'm famished.
Cook that rabbit then. They're delicious on an open fire like this.
Fine by me. You want some of this?
Nah, I'm fine. I don't like eating this late.
Okay. After all that.
So the interesting thing about this example is you actually have learned about 8 different things just in this one little sequence, right? And it felt very natural, right? It felt like a very smooth transition from one thing to the other, but you learned that you could kill animals while on a horse. You learned that rabbits were a good source of food. You learned how you were given the prompt to skin the rabbit, and then there's a difference between taking kind of the vitals of it, the skin and the good meat, but then also grabbing the rabbit as an individual thing that you can then either cook or eventually you can trade. Then how to set up camp, and then how to cook food, and you're given the option to not only cook the food and eat it for energy, but also to store it for later use. Right, that's a lot of stuff, but it does it very natural, does it very seamless. The prompts come up, it's very easy. You're given very simple choices, and this is a very nice tutorial system without it feeling like a very obvious tutorial system. And the whole game kind of acts in this way. Whenever there's something new that's encountered, it just kind of comes up. You're generally not given a warning, but it's very, very simple. Everything kind of builds on each other and makes a lot of sense. And so it's a very, it feels very emergent that these things are just kind of happening, but they're in actuality very deliberately designed, right? And of course, that is the trick of emergence. As game designers, we want our experiences to feel emergent to the player, but in reality, they're very tightly designed. Another interesting emergent system was at the camp. Every evening, usually the different crew members congregate and talk, or they'll sing, or they'll tell stories. And the first time I encountered this, I was kind of wandering around the camp, and you get a lot of prompts to sit down. I'm like, well, I don't really want to sit. I have other things to do. And at some point I stopped to just sit down and kind of whatever, and my daughter came into the room, and my daughter started telling me about some anime thing or something. I was kind of half listening to her and kind of half listening to the game, and then finally I was like, hey honey, I'm trying to play this game here, and all of a sudden one of the characters was like, oh Arthur, by the way, can you do me this favor and find me this watch, because my dad had a watch and it reminds me of my dad. And I would have completely missed that prompt, that mission, if I had just kind of sat down for a little bit and then bailed, right? And so there's this really nice thing that happens within the course of the game where you get these very direct missions. Hey, I need this thing. Hey, something lights up on the map. You got to go talk to this person. But there's also a lot of very subtle, slower types of missions that can occur over the course of the game. And I think there's something like, I don't know, there's like 30 of them or something like that. Each of the characters has something that they need, and people that you meet in town. And they're just fetch quests, right? They're no different than what you would find in any other adventure game. But what I found really amazing was the fact that I had to once again slow down and enjoy the environment in order for me to get this mission to then push me off into a new adventure. Another really fun moment is in the big city of Saint Denis, which is kind of a New Orleans analogy. And you can go to the theater, we saw the theater earlier, and go see a stage show. And one of the acts is a magician who does the famous bullet catching trick. Now this is where sometimes interesting things can happen in the game, because when I first played it, he says, hey, does anybody think I can't do this? I need someone from the audience. And so I get up and I pointed my gun at his mouth. You can see the little red dot there. And I shoot him in the face and he catches the bullet. And I was like, yeah, that was awesome. That was the best show ever. And I left. Then I went online and looked at what other people did. And other people, they didn't aim for his face. They gut shot him and killed him. And so even though this is like a slight divergence in path, it's fun, right? It becomes one of these things where I can say, you know, hey, Alex, what did you do? Did you shoot the guy in the mouth or did you shoot him in the gut? And Alex says, I shot him in the gut because I'm a bastard. And I'm like, all right, well, you know, I'll have to try that next time, right? So it creates, once again, there's just enough of these little moments built into the system of the game that's not that big, long path of the other girlfriend like we were talking about. It's instead just a little, what I call a finger, right? It's just this little finger of something different, right? And it's very easy to course correct and go back to the main narrative, but it makes a huge difference. It, once again, makes the world feel personalized. There's also, building on what the original game had, there's a lot of strangers. Some of them you help, some of them are bad, some of them you just watch, like this weird mutant guy playing a banjo. He doesn't talk, he just plays a banjo. And there's a ton of these characters all around the world. And once again, makes the world feel alive. And at a certain point, you're like, I kind of want to see that weirdo. Let me go find where he is, right? Now, often you don't get clues. The other thing that the game doesn't do is it doesn't give you a lot of overt clues. It instead lets you kind of stumble upon them, which on one hand is really amazing when something like this happens. On the other hand, if you're trying to seek them, you might have to go online, and once again, that breaks a little bit of that immersion. Also, the world, there are lots of locations that have storytelling within them. So for example, I came across this town that had been burnt to the ground. And earlier in the game, a character told me that sometimes people hid money in their chimneys. And so I went to the chimney to look for a treasure, and I found, hey, a little treasure. All right, well, I'm going to keep exploring. Maybe there's some other stuff. And I walked into a jail cell. It was the only building that was intact in this burnt up town. And when I walked into the jail, who was in there but some guy had burned to death in the jail, right? So right there, just by having this little tiny instance, it gives me a whole bunch of story, right? It tells me a lot of story without having to tell a story through cutscenes or dialogue or anything like that. They're using the level, the world, to tell all these individual little stories. Sometimes you come across little lonely graveyards and you're like, I have no idea why this is here. Did somebody die on the trail, or was there a house? I found a house that had a bunch of family members sitting around a table, and all of them were dead. And I'm like, did they get poisoned or so? I don't know what happened. But, you know, it was just something for me to stumble upon. And it was this great world building. Once again, we talked about the treasure hunts, but there's also a really neat system with legendary animals, because hunting is a big part of the game. And the cougar was one of those legendary animals. There's also all types, like there's 17 different animals you can hunt. And then when you get the parts from them, the horns or the teeth or whatever, you can use those as trinkets that give you bonuses and buffs to your character. So now I might be able to hold more herbs in my satchel, or have a greater tolerance to alcohol, or have a little bit more Deadeye in my meter. The other thing is, this game really knows its audience, the compulsive collector. They've got a whole series of these cigarette cards that are trading cards, and there's I think about like 12 different sets of things. They're everything from animals to inventions to famous characters. So once again, there's this, if you're a collector like me, you're like, oh my God, I got a Pokemon and get all these cards, right? And it's pretty insidious, because you can burn up a lot of time looking for these cards in the world. The controls, we talked about how I do feel like they kind of overloaded things a little bit, but there is so much that the character can do. I don't know how they otherwise would have been able to treat it. And the problem is, though, that there are so many controls that early in the game, it's easy to get confused with what button does what. For example, I went to a town. I had a significant bounty on my head, and I'm like, I'm going to be a good boy. I'm just going to go to the hotel. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to go do my other mission. I go maybe hunt, and everything will be swell. And I was standing in my hotel room, and my gun accidentally fired, and all of a sudden a bunch of cops came running in, and I'm like, no, I don't want to kill anybody. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And I saw these little red dots coming for me up the stairs, and so I hid behind my bed, and as the cops came in, I just shot them dead, and they just started to stack like cordwood in the doorway, and I had to get the heck out of town. It was not good. The other problem is a lot of players report that they sometimes accidentally hit the punch button, which is the circle button. And if you stand next to your horse and punch it, it's going to kick you. And I died at least 2 or 3 times in the early game by getting kicked to death by my horse, because I accidentally punched him. And the times I didn't get kicked to death, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I ran up and pet him and gave him some food to make him feel better. And the other thing that's from the original game is the auto-aim system. And it's real easy to learn. It's got a lot of depth. You can upgrade your weapon to have it lock on faster and to kill characters faster. You can craft bullets to be more effective. It's kind of a crutch to new or unskilled players. And some players online have been complaining about how overpowered it is. But to be honest, I found it extremely helpful, particularly in high stress situations, because it does do a little bit of aiming. So that way it's easier to identify where enemies are. And so particularly the amount of times I died so often in the early game, being able to kind of met out a little bit of damage in these high stress situations, it made me feel a little better as the game went on. And now I'm pretty good at it. So I don't need the auto aim as much. But there's a lot of situations that require their own interesting control schemes, and it's all very contextual. So, riding has a pretty complex way that you can navigate the horse or feed it while you're on it or take care of it. There's a lot of mini games, including five-finger fillet, which essentially is a rhythm game where you're jabbing a knife between your fingers. Roping is actually a little bit of a tricky thing to get a hold of, but once you master it, you feel pretty good about it and you start showing off a little bit. And one of my favorites is there's a bank robbery and the player is given the option to blow the safe or to pick it. And the picking actually uses the vibration control really well. It rumbles a lot as you get towards the spot, and it really makes you feel like you're picking the lock in the game. The other interesting thing of the feedback is the visuals. So to go back to the lock picking, not only do you get this visual vibration, but look what happens to the character as he hits each of the dials on the lock. I've just gotten the first one, right, by rotating the dial. Now I've got the second one. What's going on? Look at his hand. He's helping us keep track of what's going on. Just by that very simple action of extending the second finger helps us keep track of what's going on in the game. Very subtle, but very clever use. There's also some other visual trickery that happens that we see in a lot of other games. There's a sequence where Arthur is kidnapped and tortured, and the screen becomes very hazy and red, much like in a Call of Duty game. And while I'm not a big fan of that thing, it definitely heightened the drama and the danger because all my health was low. I had no weapons. I felt like I was in a very fragile state. And so these are all tricks that Rockstar has been using in all their other games, and lots of other game companies have used this as well. Collision is something that sometimes can get a little tricky in the game. The collision is, if there's a big complaint about the game, is sometimes the collision is a little inconsistent. But what makes it worse is when you're not really paying attention and looking at the wild horses that are driving by. And I want you to look at the detail of the shifting canvas on top of that. Oh wait, I got to get on the road. It's very easy to get snagged on things in this game, particularly with the wagons. Wait, come back. And you can't rehitch those horses either. Darn, there goes a perfectly good wagon. So yeah, collision is an interesting thing in this game. There's a lot of fun little side effects that happen. You can shoot people's hats off, punch them off, things like that. It's not perfect. I've noticed some sorting issues that happen, like this snake that I thought was going to murder me because he was sorting through my boat, but he just ended up dying actually. And that's usually the default. If something happens collision-wise, usually it results in a creature's death. But the AI of the creatures is pretty good to get themselves out of the mess, no matter how bad the situation gets.
Shit. Yeah.
Wait, come back. My horse got ate by a rock. Well, he'll figure it out somehow, I guess.
Let's get it. Wait. Here. Yep. Come on.
All right, it all worked out in the end for Silver, too. So a lot of the dynamic systems, a lot of information that is passed on to the player, and they use every trick in the book, literally, to convey that. I want you to notice that this is the catalog in which you order different things at the general store, but there's actually also lots of fiction to read, even in the catalog. No space is wasted in this game. There's a reason why it took 8 years to make this game. There was so much content, but there's all these different ways to get information. with the interface system, there's a lot of color coding that goes on, not just in the items. These are health-related items, and Deadeye and that. They even show you what they're good for in the corner. But there's also interesting information systems going on here in the map to tell you this is an important place that you need to go. You'll get information from. And like I said, there are certain things that it's a little frustrating, but there's certain things that can only be done in certain situations. So for example, if I lose my hat in a fight or falling off of a horse or something, I can always get it back by getting back on my horse and putting my hat back on my head. But that's something I learned very late in my play, and I was pleased that I could do that, but I was like, oh, I wish I had known that sooner. The other thing that can be a little pesky is loading and saving games. It's not buried very deep, but I think the language is slightly off. I know they're trying to keep things thematic, but in order, I spent like a good 5 minutes trying to figure out if I could figure out how to save the game. And originally I was like, oh, if I save the game, maybe it's under progress, or maybe it's under player. But it's actually under story, and then you get the screen, which is, but then it says save game, load game, new game, exit game, when really it probably should have just said game, right? Now, they were trying to keep it thematic, and I think there was one time that it was a bit of a misstep. They should have either said save story, load story, or game, 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 game. It does offer you a lot of save slots, though, so if you make a mistake, you want to roll back or maybe experience something cool, there's a lot of options within the save game. I didn't want to go through the whole save interface. It's deep, it's huge, there's a lot of stuff going on with it. If you play the game, don't forget to explore these systems because there's a lot of good information and fiction into that. The game also has a lot of good prompts, not just contextual stuff like we see in a lot of other games, like he's sneaking up and you all of a sudden get the stealth kill button. But there's icons and sound, like you heard during the sequence where we were hunting the rabbit. There were lots of dings and noises to kind of cue you in that you had been successful in your actions. Sound is a very important part of this game. You shouldn't play it without the sound on. But you should play it with the subtitles on because sometimes characters talk over each other and you might miss important information. The other thing is sometimes prompts and information comes in areas you don't quite expect it. So these binoculars will give you information about the condition of an animal. So it often behooves you to first scope out an animal before you decide to hunt it. Because if you're looking for a pristine coat for your crafting, you want to make sure that the animal you're hunting is the right one. Otherwise you might get stuck with kind of a mangy or a poor creature. The Deadeye system is one that actually doesn't get used as much as it did in Red Dead Redemption 1. It's a system where that time slows down, everything kind of becomes sepia tone. The player usually gets an option to do a slow draw, where you press the R1 button very slowly. It builds this meter, and as you're doing that, you're moving a cursor across your enemy to pinpoint different targets on them. We'll look at a situation where this gets used in a second. The other system, though, that this has is the Eagle Eye system, and this is actually a much more important interface system that you use for tracking, for finding herbs. You can scope out other horses and characters. It's kind of a mix of Batman's detective vision and the pinging thing from The Last of Us. It's actually a very good system. So let's watch this system in action here. Here I am tracking some creature. So you'll notice you kind of toggle in between, and then the tracking actually illuminates a trail on the path that you can then follow in real time. Horses don't like bears. Here's the Deadeye mode, right here. Let's see. There we go, right there. So now I can mark the bear with multiple targets, but one was enough to do it. I want also notice the scar marks on my coat from being mauled. There's so many great little details in this game. I suggest you run from bears. All right, so a few more things about this game that I wouldn't be remiss to tell you about. First of all, this game is gorgeous. It is easily the most beautiful game out there. There are just moments where you want to sit and admire the environment, watch a nice sunset. Sometimes you even find a double rainbow all the way. But the attention to detail, once again, is amazing. I had more fun tromping around in the snow and watching it deform just because the engine and snow is only maybe 1/8 of the entire environment in the game, but yet so much detail. As you walk by it, the sun glistens off of it. It's fantastic. There are books around the world that you can just pick up and read, and they've got pages of content in it, that like stories and recipes and nature guides and things like that. Some of them illustrated. You can customize your weapons to a ridiculous degree, not just functionally but visually. I can get, this is a gun that was taken off of a gunslinger, but you can do similar type of engraving, even down to the point of adjusting the size of the grain on your rifle butt. When they were making this game, the developers consulted with experts on wind and leaf patterns, so they could do accurate, naturalistic patterns of the leaves falling off of trees in different wind conditions. And the birding gameplay is so realistic. The Audubon Society has recommended this game to all of its members as a good alternative for birding. It also has tons of Easter eggs. There are cheat codes written in hidden spots around the world. Everything from in the walls of burnt down buildings to the ice of this frozen lake. There are some missions that you do not know at all about unless you find things in the world. This is a mission that I was in the city. I found written clues in very hard to find places all around the city that led me to a location where a vampire would show up only between the hours of midnight and 1. And so at first I had to triangulate on my map where he would be, which was in the middle of a pentagram. And then I had to make sure I was in the right place, but not too close because I didn't want to scare him off. And then when he shows up, I murdered him because he was a vampire. But there's just so much more in this game that I could just keep talking for another hour or two about. The hilarious films that are in the penny arcades, the weather system that requires you to change your clothing, otherwise you'll suffer health penalties, the super deep compendiums that catalog every item in the game, the strange characters that you run across like this Helios worshiper who is the team's homage to the character from Dark Souls, to the backstory of my dog who doesn't even appear in the game, to quests to find mysterious characters and locations like this ghost train. The game is richer than any other game other than maybe World of Warcraft that I've ever played. And it is so worth the effort. However, there is one thing I will warn you about. If you play this game, you will get a distinct hankering for stew, because you eat a lot of stew in the game, and so I had to make myself a bowl or two to enjoy it and feel a little bit like my man Arthur. Any questions? Yes.
If someone would pick up both games, Red Dead 1 and Red Dead 2,
yeah.
Considering this is a prequel, would you say play them in chronological order or in the order that they actually came out?
I would actually suggest playing this first, although the risk is by playing the first one second, it will feel like a slightly lesser experience. It's still a great game. I always recommend Red Dead Redemption. As a matter of fact, if I were to make a list of maybe the 5 best experiences you can play as a gamer, I would put the original Red Dead Redemption in that list. But this easily pushes that, or at least lives alongside of it. It is so worth the time, the effort, the money, just as a player, but to get a greater understanding of how big and little things can connect and make such a huge difference to the play experience. Yes?
As a designer and as a player, do you think that if they hadn't talked to the experts on wind and leaves to see that, do you think that would have taken away, or is it just like a subconscious thing that adds to it without you actually knowing it?
It's definitely a subconscious thing. I didn't know about that until I heard an article on NPR about it. But that said, the fact that they went to that level of detail really shows the kind of obsessive nature. Now, of course, the downside of it was Sam Houser bragging how everybody was spending 100-hour weeks working on this game, and it shows. But that said, that's a pretty grueling work schedule for those employees. So, at what cost, right? Yes, Mara.
Since it's a well-developed story-based game, do you think, since reports are coming out that it's launching another beta test for its online version, do you think it'll be able to compare itself with other games such as maybe Fortnite or PUBG or stuff like that?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, the Gun Rush just came out like a week ago or so, and that's the closest. I mean, that's the same mode. It's a battle royale mode, right? What I'm really curious to see is how much of the feature set of the original multiplayer for Red Dead Redemption is in the new beta, right? The new online stuff, because that original game had a ton of things to do and a lot of really fun activities for socializing, like the robbing the trains and the posses and all that. So my guess is at the very least they'll try to match most, if not all, of that functionality. The real question is, what other new things will they add? Yes?
So in references to questions such as, so earlier you mentioning about the auto-aiming making it sort of easier.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that would be more of an immersion sort of substance, or would that be more of a source of a difficulty or boundary?
I think it's a little bit of a balancing technique, because shooting is, out of most of the skills in the game, shooting is one that you do a lot, but it's also important for advancing the narrative. And I think that, I mean, having that, this is something that is in most other third-person action-type games, right? Like the Uncharted games and whatever, right? You name it. They all have some sort of auto-locking once you get a weapon at least to a certain level or something like that. And I think that this is a way to make a system that players might find difficult just a lot easier to kind of wrap their hands around, so you don't have to think about as much, because ultimately this game has a feeling of that immersion and that emergent play and that kind of smoothness, right, of things kind of going one into the other. And if you're not fumbling about with the gun trying to I'm just trying to get that little pixel lined up just right on that guy's head, if you spend less time doing that, you're going to be spending more time in the world of the game and less in the game of the game. You know what I mean? So I think that it's, even though it's something that people might go, oh man, it makes things so easy. Myself as a designer, I feel that game designers, we should show a little love to the player. And if the system is particularly tricky, we should do things to kind of make that a little bit easier for them. So I don't mind it myself. Matter of fact, like I said, I like it because it helps me be a better player.
Jumping off of that, when you were talking about aiming the specific pixel, is there any feature fatigue in this game? Because I know with GTA San Andreas, where they had all those features, it felt like, oh, I have to do all this, and they're nitpicking me so much. I don't want to do all this. I just want to play a game.
No, because the amount of other things I can do is huge. There are 6 different table games like dominoes and blackjack and the 5-finger fillet and things like that. There's hunting. There's going out and meeting strangers. There's robberies. You can do the big robberies that are with the story, but you can, if a stagecoach is passing by, you can decide to rob that. Of course, then getting away from the law. There's the exploring part is a huge part. The treasure hunts. All these things. If you're feeling fatigue from the game, it's more because you're doing too much of the same thing over again, rather than the option is there to do so many things that the world kind of tells the player, hey, look, there's other things you can do. And it gives you lots of opportunities to go do them. Like there's a lot of like those side of the road encounters. Sometimes those have different interactions, like you're lifting a horse, so you have to do a quick button press. You don't do a lot of that in the course of the normal game. So, or the cracking of the safe. That was another thing. It felt kind of like a little mini game in the middle of all this other stuff that I didn't normally do.
Follow-up question to that. Is there any choice paralysis where you're just given too much space to roam free and it feels like you can't figure out what to do?
Yeah, I think there's that tension of the thing that I need to do to advance the story versus the I can go and do whatever I want. And as if you're a narrative-driven player, you're going to feel a little pressure. I better get back and advance the story. But conversely, the world is kind of calling for you to go out and do all these things. I mean, there's still points on the map, not even counting the stuff that's locked off for me, that I still haven't even gotten to yet, that I'm like, I want to get to see where the edge of the map is and see what happens. So it's up to the player. It's really up to the player.
Okay.
Yes?
In reference to the world immersion, do you think the game would be helped or hurt by adding multiplayer features? I mean, it'd be like multiple versions of the same character running around.
Right. Yeah, that's a question that I am curious to see how they handle. I assume that they'll have some sort of character creation, but it will only be for that online. I think they had the same system in the original one. Yeah. You guys, one of you guys? Yeah. Anand?
Given that you said that there are a lot of side missions which you can completely miss and that are kept completely secret from the player, is there something in the pause menu or something that tells you that there are secret missions and that at the end of the game it does still say that, hey, there's 7 or 8 missions that you still haven't done?
Yeah, they do that old Xbox trick of there is something, but you don't know, you haven't unlocked it. Now, I wish that they had given you some context to help kind of push you in that direction. They don't, but they're just kind of following standard gaming achievement chart systems. So I don't fault them, although it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a prompt to kind of give you a clue. Hey, this is about hunting. This is about meeting someone. This is about robbing, whatever. All right.
And sort of following on that, are any of those secret missions, as far as you know, related to certain parts of the game that say you finished like 60% of the story, 2 of those missions are no longer available?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually was wondering about that because of what happened with the dog, and I don't know. I would have to go back and go online or look at a strategy guide or something like that. Now, once again, it's that breaking of the immersion, but I think that, I don't know, I'm torn. On one hand, I'm like, well, this is just how it is with other games. But part of me, I kind of wish they'd built in a little bit more of a system to help push me without leaving the confines of the game, the game world itself. Yes?
You mentioned neuronarrative dissonance. So in games like this that give you so much freedom, have you thought of like possible ways to like mitigate that?
Well, it would involve having multiple narratives, which once again is that issue of they might not ever see it, right? I would love to see them like do the next game where there are multiple paths, right? They build on the technology. They've got it done. It works great. They've got a ton of content. Maybe in a DLC we'll get that. Kind of like the Gay Tony or the Vice City or the things that happened in the wake of Grand Theft Auto. Obviously it's early days, right? It's game just come out. We won't probably be seeing DLC until the summer, if not the Christmas for this coming year. Like I said, I wanted to see, things that would allow me to romance characters. I wanted to see something that wasn't just, hey, I'm trying to be a good person. Oh, now I've got to go murder this entire town. And that starts to create that jarring effect. But they wouldn't be able to tell the individual story of the character. And I think a big, even though it's a cool part of it, it's a little bit to the detriment of this game that it is so closely tied to the original game. because we know what the outcomes are. We know that John Marston gets left behind by his gang, and he's like, oh, curse those guys, I've got to hunt them down and kill them. And Dutch, ends up in the way that he does, and a few of the other characters that pop up in the original game. I think that if we didn't have that, it might give us a little bit more of a freedom to have different directions, but ultimately they wanted to tell this story about this guy who was conflicted and eventually dies of tuberculosis, and just kind of shows how kind of crappy it was to live back in those days, So it would fracture the actual story the designers wanted to tell. Anyone else? And how many of you guys now want to play this game? Yeah, a lot of you, huh? All right, well, good. All right, yeah, question.
Yeah, do you feel like the attention to the realism in the game detracts from some enjoyment?
No, not at all. It enhances. Matter of fact, I spent about, I was riding down a road on my horse, and I was trying to find any sort of texture that looked close to, if not identical, to anything else that was nearby. And damn it, I could not find any, like the way that the rocks were laid out on the road just looked completely naturalistic. There's nothing in that game. I mean, there are trees that are similar. I'm sure if you break it down to a more atomic level, you'll very easily be able to see these things. But in general, as a glance or as a survey, it feels like a completely unique. There are places in there you can feel the handcraftedness of this game. It is amazing. Yes.
Given the size of this game, how buggy is it? I mean, not necessarily game-breaking bugs, but
Depends on what video you watch. Now, I admit my own experiences, other than those few that I showed you, I only experienced one or two other like little minor pops, like a character. One of them was a character who was sitting in a chair. I kind of made a kind of a weird move, and he kind of went whoop and like popped up in his chair for a second. Other than that, though, I didn't see a lot of it. Oh no, I did see one where there was there's a lot of funny physics things that can happen in this game. One was I was on a road and I saw like a horse and a carriage collide with each other, and the horse went shooting up in the air and flying probably about like 40 feet in the air and then coming back down. So sometimes funny physics things like that will happen. They just hit at the wrong angle and go flying off. But to be honest, it didn't happen as often as I thought it would. When you watch the videos, these kind of funny clip show things, it looks like it's happening all over the place. But to be honest, it was like once every 2 or 3 hours of gameplay at best. And sometimes you had to be in like that, riding that horse down those very tricky rocks. That was like I was just asking for collision trouble with that. So, anyone? Any more questions? Yes.
Given that the developers were trying to tell a story about the Old West and how shitty it is to live, and someone dies of tuberculosis at the end, do you think it would benefit to the game if they scaled back on the world a bit and focused more on more linear?
I think that the world that they had built in the original one, I mean, the world that we have in this game is smaller, I think, than the one in the first game. Like, there's not the whole Mexico section and things like that. So I think they did dial it back a little bit, maybe to tell that story. I'm not sure why, other than maybe the workload. So it is a acreage smaller world, but it still feels massive. I mean, it's still huge. And the other thing that makes it feel very diverse and big is that there's a lot of biomes in the world. Like, you start off in a very cold environment, you work your way down to more of a lush valley. If you go east, you encounter swamps. If you go west, you encounter mesas. If you go further south, you encounter red dirt, like in the south. So these major changes in environments help sell the vastness of the world, even if it's a slightly more compact version. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. It was great for you to show up, and hopefully you learned a little bit something and how we can apply this idea of the play-centric design thinking to games, to learn lots more about it. and you know, hopefully, like I said, it inspires you to play the game because it is definitely worth it. So thanks again for coming.